Coming to you from the award-winning Final Third Cigar and Whiskey Lounge, PCA's 2024 Best of Leaf Midwest Cigar Bar, Indiana's exclusive Aladino Cigar Lounge, it's the Final Third Podcast.
Back to the Final Third Podcast. I'm Rob.
I'm Mike.
I'm Scott.
And playing the part of Will, I'm Scott.
And tell us who we're here to see today, Scott.
Yeah, today we have the owner and co-founder of Chattanooga Whiskey, Mr. Tim Piersant, one of my favorite distilleries, and so I'm happy to be here and happy to have Tim show us around.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited for this.
Great to have you guys here.
Yeah, it's already been a great conversation starting out, so hopefully we don't stumble across our words now. We already had a lot of great conversations.
We haven't even started drinking.
I was going to say,
first time.
It is time for drinking.
Well, we did have Bloody Marys, so I mean that counts for a little something.
Yeah, I didn't. Sorry.
Oh well.
I'm sure there's a place we can get some whiskey around here.
I bet there's some pretty good whiskey if I recall.
I'm a fan. Every good day starts with the Bloody Mary. So.
Yeah.
There
you go.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Tim, thank you again for letting us come down here and hang out with you today. We are sitting here in the Riverfront Distillery, which they do not do tours of, so you guys are getting a sneak peek inside somewhere you may never be able to see. So tell us a little bit about how you started, the distilleries, the different locations, and just give us a little breakdown.
Yeah. So we're in downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. Both of our locations are in downtown Chattanooga, approximately a mile away from each other. One's in the historic Southside District. That's the Chattanooga Whiskey Experimental Distillery. And then the Riverfront Distillery here on the Tennessee Riverfront. So right off of MLK and Riverfront Parkway.
Now, first, two locations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you said experimental. So anytime I hear experimental, all my, drinking days, beer and wine and whiskey and everything.
Yeah.
As soon as I hear experimental, it's like I get a little excited.
Yeah. There's well, I mean, if it weren't for experimental, then we wouldn't have Tennessee High Malt. We wouldn't be doing the things that we're doing here. In fact, we've scaled up more than 30 more than 30 recipes, whiskey recipes, from experimental to Riverfront. So even though this is the larger distillery where we scale, we still explore at Riverfront as well. So just to back up a little bit, my co-founder and I started the company in October of 2011. It was illegal to distill in Hamilton County, and it was in fact illegal to distill in the majority of the 95 counties in Tennessee. Our goal, of course, was to be the first distillery back in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 100 years. So in order to do that, we had to change the laws. So we created a campaign called the Vote Whiskey Campaign. And simultaneously, we launched Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Reserve and Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Cask. Those were the first two labels on the shelf, which, because we couldn't distill here, we had to source. Yeah. And at the time, there weren't nearly as many distilleries to source from as there are today. Yeah. So fortunately, one of those distilleries that was making great whiskey that we that had whiskey available to us was Lawrenceburg Distillers of Indiana, which you guys probably know eventually became MGP. Yep. So we started off with a great bourbon. In fact, I think it was 3.5 years aged when we started off. It was their 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley recipe, which I'm sure you're familiar with. There's quite a few brands that are using that recipe now. So part of launching Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Reserve and Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Cask was that it was also a campaign in the bottle, right? I mean, if people were going to drink it here, they were going to be able to buy it at liquor stores and they were to be able to buy it at bars and restaurants, then why shouldn't it be made here as well?
Yeah.
And we launched Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, In April of 2012 was when Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 hit the shelves. And it wasn't until May of 2013 that we got the laws passed and that the Vote Whiskey campaign became successful. Interestingly, we started off by lobbying the county commission because in 2009, there was a craft whiskey bill that passed. And Nashville and Sevierville were two of the counties that made whiskey, or actually any spirits, legal to distill again since Prohibition. Unfortunately, because of the way that bill was written, it didn't open up the majority of the state, of the 95 counties. So we had to essentially, we wanted Hamilton County to be kind of adopted or adopt that bill, but the state attorney general said you can't do that, which meant that we had to blaze our own trail. So we formed House Bill 102 and Senate Bill 129, which stated if there's liquor by the drink and packaged retail sales, then you can also get a license to distill in that municipality.
Which only makes sense.
Yeah. So it was written that House Bill 102 was written, I think, much more cleanly than the original 09 bill. And when it passed in May of 2013, fortunately, we were able to establish ourselves in 2015. It took us almost 2 more years to become the first distillery in Chattanooga, but we were also founding members of the Tennessee Distillers Guild and the Tennessee Whiskey Trail, which has more than 50 distilling licenses in it now. So back then, there were less than 5. So we really spearheaded this movement that has positively impacted tourism. It has positively impacted, obviously, the craft, most importantly, and has positively impacted local ag as well. So, for example, 100% of our corn is locally grown. It's all grown by Catisa Farms, which is a 5th-generation farmer in Riddleton, Tennessee.
Oh, cool.
So, moving on, we established in 2015.
Well, first of all,
go ahead.
on behalf of all whiskey lovers out there, thank you for blazing that trail.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Because, I mean, you guys are making great whiskey. We all love it. And, it's good to see you being out there doing that. Honestly, there's, some other big distilleries in this state that we won't name that should have been blazing that trail a long time ago. And for you guys to come out and do that, that's pretty awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. We're definitely proud of it. Still very active members of the Guild. In fact, our Chief Operating Officer serves on the board of the Guild. And, we didn't just want to be the first back in Chattanooga, and we didn't just want to help blaze that trail. We wanted to be the best.
Yeah.
It would have been a crime for us to do all that work and then just, not do very much.
Yeah.
So that's where I think Chattanooga whiskey goes. I mean, that's really where we're different, is we've committed to going above and beyond in every step of the process. And that's the whole theme around our own unique style of bourbon that we coined and trademarked called Tennessee High Malt. So how Tennessee High Malt came to be is the experimental whiskey distillery. Mm-hmm. From 2015 to 2017, we put away over 100 different recipes that were all high in specialty malted grains. To back up, the reason we did that is in 2014, we hired Grant McCracken, who is now our chief product officer and founding distiller. So he came on board as our head distiller. We don't advertise this, but I think for context, it's important to note that his background, is beer, and he was one of the best brewers in the world. In fact, he was the head brewer and head of research and development for Boston Beer. So he's developing hundreds of different recipes for one of the most prominent breweries in the world, arguably the most prominent craft breweries in the world that kind of helped change the game of beer. Well, he saw an opportunity to do that in American whiskey and in bourbon, especially with an opportunity in Tennessee, one of the top 2 bourbon and whiskey producing states historically. Mm-hmm. So Grant comes on board. We build the experimental distillery. It's a 100-gallon pot still. It's 3 100-gallon fermenters. And he says, we're not just going to keep making this recipe, right? Like, we're not, we're obviously successfully selling this MGP bourbon, but Tim, you just spent years changing laws and opening up craft distilling for the state of Tennessee, we don't want to do all that just to make just to copy MGP, right? And I said, no, of course not, Grant.
Which is also growing in the market hugely at the time,
yeah,
right?
right.
You're seeing
Yeah.
new distilleries pop up and they have to start with sourcing. So
Yep.
now you're basically going to be stuck having the product that everybody else has.
Which was a pressure. Not only that, when we selected our bottle from OI, it was, I think we were one of the first to have that bottle. And then we started seeing the bottle all over the market. And then we started seeing the recipe all over the market. So yeah, that really was that pressure was bearing down on us that we needed to continue to differentiate.
But now you've got a distiller that you've hired
Yep.
that is familiar with all these experimental malts.
Yep.
We obviously know what Boston Beer Company has done with some of their specialty products and their annual releases.
Yep.
And you've got kind of the tools in place to take the next step.
Yeah, and it was a huge risk, but the faith that we had and the faith that Grant instilled in us is that, what you can do with specialty malted grains. It's richer, it's more complex. You can malt any cereal grain. So, what that should do is create a richer, more complex bourbon, right? Mm-hmm. And as long as you care for it from beginning to end through that process, and that's what we did experimental. We did. We've implemented a lot of things, long cold fermentations. We'll get into all that as we tour through Riverfront. But we got to 2017 having produced over 100 different barrels of different recipes, all featuring specialty malted high end specialty malted grains. And when we established Riverfront, because we had a successful first 2 years at the experimental distillery, we were able to raise the funds to be able to build this location, which, that location is a few thousand square feet and produces 50 barrels a year. This location is 50,000 square feet and produces 2,000 barrels a year. So, pretty sizably different. And we were able to choose from those 100 recipes as to what we wanted to scale up here and replace the MGP product. That was the goal, right? Is that once we scaled recipes from there to here, that eventually when they matured to become straight bourbon whiskeys, we would be able to officially have authentically produced Chattanooga whiskey, but it'd be our own unique recipe. The risk was that, well, there were several risks. One of them was that it was a very different recipe than the MGP, right?
Yeah.
The other, and we had already established a following with the MGP. The other risk is that we're making it on a 100-gallon pot still over there. And
I was curious about that.
we're making it on a column still over here. And there's a very big difference between flavor profiles on those two systems. Yeah. So when we scale this recipe, even when we select our favorite recipes from experimental and we decide to scale them, are they going to taste anything like what we selected over there at EXP? Yeah. So there were a lot of significant risks involved, especially considering we established by 2018 a greater than 15,000 case demand for the MGP recipe that was in Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Reserve.
I've never heard of any distiller that is developing recipes on one type of still and then moving to another. Usually you see they purposely select, either the column or the pot, depending on what they're trying to make,
right,
and the elements that are going into it. Yep. The ability to compare has got to be really interesting as part of your experimental process and going, okay, what translates, what doesn't, do we have to make minor adjustments to be able to account, whether it's temperature or actual elements in the recipe. I just don't know that I've heard of anybody else that is really doing that kind of A to B cycle and having not only that challenge to deal with, but also being able to better understand some of those things that make it different between pot and column stills.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where we feel like we didn't write our story wrote itself, right? Because it was by the way that it happened, and we wanted to build a larger distillery. We wanted to have this column still from Vendome that we immediately started producing off of. I mean, that was our goal. But we couldn't make that happen. My co-founder and I split. We had to raise additional funds. We kind of just had to get our feet on the ground for the first time. And the only real affordable solution to be able to do that was to build a much, much smaller distillery. fortunately, I went to Vendome because we were already planning on, constructing the system here from Vendome, and said, "Hey, do you guys do a 100-gallon pot still, hybrid pot still?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course we can produce, yeah, like they were gonna turn that down." And so, we still our process, our mindset, how we pursued what we wanted to produce was still with the best intent. And so we wanted to produce the best product at experimental, but we knew it was going to be very, very small, but that gave us the ability to explore, and we had to have faith that through this exploration we were going to be able to sell this product because it was good, right? And ultimately we loved what we were doing, and so did our investors, and so did the community. So it gave us the opportunity to scale it here, and we just took the same approach. We're every step of the process, we're working with these amazing grains and recipes, but we're not just throwing them into any fermenter, and we're not just fermenting them for 3 days at 95 degrees like really most other bourbon distilleries in the US. We're fermenting them at 78 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days. We're going twice the average fermentation time as really any other distillery in the US.
That's really getting down to like beer fermentation temperatures.
That's where it came from. But it's about, it's time and temperature, it's care, right? Mm-hmm. So we had faith that as long as we had that, we were convicted about what we were producing, that it would be uniquely ours and good, that it would be good no matter what system we produced it on. And but to answer your question, like, was it different? Yes.
Yeah.
It was different. For 91, so we selected the 91st barrel distilled at experimental to scale up and replace the MGP product. It was good at experimental, and when we started distilling over here, we just kept our fingers crossed the whole time that it was going to be as good over here, and I think it turned out even better. And part of that is because a column still, and it's a column and a pot doubler, but it's so efficient and it produces such a clean product that, on a pot still, you get this grunginess that we love because of the craft. And we like complexity, right? So you're going to get a lot of complexity off of cutting your heads and tails and just keeping your hearts on a pot still. Well, in a column, and by the way, you want to run it at kind of higher proof on a pot still. So we're going to run, to be a bourbon, it's got to be under 160. So we might run in like the mid 140s over on that pot. Well, on the column, you got to run it a lot lower proof to capture as much of that flavor as possible, because it's so efficient.
Yep.
That you're kind of just you're gonna clean up your flavor profile so much that your flavor profile is gonna be gone. It just becomes ethanol, right? Yeah. So we run this column at 133, which is really low.
Wow.
But so really, we think over here we're getting the benefit of complexity because we run it so low, but also of approachability because it's so clean coming off the column. Again, it's just, we could run this thing at 145. We could ferment in 3 days. We could jam it into a barrel as quickly as possible. We just don't do that, and the product ends up, I think, great because we don't do that.
Yeah. So you're distilling at a lower proof. What does your barrel entry proof look like then?
So yeah, this is we can touch on all that when we go through, but just to answer that question, I know we want to walk, but to answer that question, it's not just one barrel entry proof. Another opportunity to gain complexity is in the entry proofs, how you go into the barrel. So really, truly every step.
So real quick before we start walking through this location here, old car dealership.
Yep.
And we are in this event space. We'll get some footage of this. And obviously this space is available for events. So, for all of our Final Third people out there, you can come down to Chattanooga, and if you got something going on, a wedding or whatever,
you can rent it out.
It's a beautiful, beautiful space.
Thank you.
Yep. Really, really well done.
Yeah, this was a Chevrolet dealership that was built in the early 70s. And we
down to the brand of vehicle you call.
That's cool. Yeah, and we took it over, from them in 2017.
Yeah, for our locals, not Chattanooga locals, but back home, it's a lot like a car dealership in Elwood.
Yeah.
There's,
Coochie.
yeah,
Used to be Coochie.
there you go.
Now
So,
it's something else.
all right, well, let's get moving to the,
Yeah, let's walk.
tour. Enjoy live harness racing action at Harrah's Hoosier Park, Tuesday through Saturday through November 30th. First post on weeknights is 6:15 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Saturdays. Also enjoy the Hop Bebop concert series to go along with racing on Saturdays with local musical acts live from the Hop Outdoor Recreational Area from 7 to 10 p.m. Admission is free. Harrah's Hoosier Park, premier gaming in the heart of the Midwest. So tell us where we're at.
Yeah, we're in the milling area. So this is where we're going to grind all of our grain into a flour to be able to feed it into the cooker. And we have 50-pound bags here that our specialty malted grains come in. And then, of course, we have these multi-thousand-pound bags as well when we're utilizing a lot more like malted rye, for example. All of our corn is in a silo out front that says made with locally grown Tennessee corn from Catisa Farms. So we're very proud of that partnership. It's all non-GMO yellow corn. And of course, that's it's a really important foundation for making bourbon.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to confuse the consumer, and that's part of our educational process in getting the word out about Tennessee High Malt. 91 and 111 are by definition, by TTB definition, straight bourbon whiskeys. But they are a minimum of 25% in specialty malted grains. And that is our qualification for Tennessee High Malt.
So explain just briefly, because people may not understand specialty grains.
Yep.
What exactly does that mean in your world? Because I think beer, right? We're
Right.
going to malted barley,
Yeah.
and we've got all kinds of the different toasts and roasts and all these things going on
Yeah.
there. In this context, specialty malts, give us the rundown.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with roast and toast, right? That's on our messaging, is that it's made with roasted and toasted grains. So it is what makes great beer. And our philosophy is that great whiskey comes from great beer. And most consumers don't know that. Historically, maybe a lot of distillers have never taken that approach, right? They probably haven't taken that, I got to make great beer in order to convert that to great whiskey. Because it requires a lot of detail, like I said, in every step of the process, in what grains you're using, in the fermentation process, going low and cold versus short and hot, right? So we are utilizing roasted and toasted specialty malted grains that are also used for making great beer. You can malt any cereal grain. So it's just about time and temperature in a kiln, really, right? So taking that grain, you're steeping it in water. It begins to sprout. It opens up. There's a germination process. There's a floor drying, air drying process, getting the moisture content right within the grain, and then a kilning process. And in the kilning process, based on time and temperature in that kiln, you can roast it, you can toast it, you can smoke it, and you can create hundreds of different flavor profiles from any cereal grain. So
So the ones that really geek out there and you start looking at these specialty grains, I mean, different sugar contents, different kind of smoky elements. It's the difference between a Guinness and a blonde ale, right?
Exactly.
Is that grain and the various
that's exactly
basically
right.
treatments that happen to it.
And you can make great bourbon from that.
And that's really interesting because I've always wondered about that. I look at brandy, for instance,
Sure.
cognac, right?
Yeah.
Well, great cognac comes from great wine.
Right.
You can't have a crappy wine and have really good brandy. We talk about this even, you can't have a bad white dog and expect the barrel to make great whiskey. You got to start with great products all the way through.
Yeah, can't wait for you guys to try our white dog.
Oh, we're excited.
We
We're
think
really
we
pumped
think it's the
about it.
best.
So I've always been curious. You have all these different variations of malted barley. There's the chocolate malted or the honey malt.
Right.
So is that just a difference in the processing parameters, like
Correct.
the heat, the temperature?
Correct.
the
Time and temperature.
So
Yeah.
you could take one barley
Yeah.
and you can malt it a number of different ways, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
so it's not different grains. It's just processing
It's also different
parameters?
grains too, because know,
Okay.
for example, our malted rye, 99 rye, which is a fairly popular product. It's really like if you look at our lineup, 91, 111 are the bulk of our sales. 99 rye, BIB are kind of the next two in line. But our 91 and 111 is 4 grains, 3 malts. So is our 99 rye. Those 3 malts are 3 different specialty malted rye grains.
Okay.
So it includes like a chocolate malted rye and a caramel malted rye that are in there.
Right.
So you can roast and toast any cereal grain. It doesn't just have to be barley.
So are you even using like 2-row, 6-row? I mean, you're doing all those levels of variation?
Yeah. So we've gotten when it comes to our corn, we exclusively use
Right.
non-GMO yellow corn. When it comes to specialty malted grains, we really lean on our maltsters around the country and around the world on what is available, and we will work with everything. I mean, experimental, I feel like we already have. I mean, there's some stuff out there we still haven't worked with because it's almost endless. The variations are almost endless. But I mean, 500 experiments, 500 experimental barrels.
That's a lot.
I mean, in harvest bourbon, batch 39, I mean, it has triticale in it. It's got seven different grains in it.
Yeah.
So
Triticale, is that an ancient grain?
it's a blend of rye and wheat.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
It dates back to like the 19th century, I think. Scotland,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, introduced.
I think you got like the
triticale.
ancient grains that are the New World grains, right? Like
Yeah.
quinoa
Yeah.
and some of those.
Yeah.
And I've seen some distilleries try and use some of those
Yeah,
products.
I don't know if they call a 19th century Scotland triticale grain an ancient grain or not. I don't know if that qualifies as ancient.
But you did have something that you referred to as ancient wheat a little while back, right?
Yep,
So-
that utilized an older style of wheat that was like a sweeter, I think, wheat. Gosh, to be honest with you, we've gone through so many experiments that I start losing track on some of these details. But I can tell you, our distillers are the better people to ask that. Like Grant, let's see if Grant's around today. He might be able to answer some of those questions.
Yeah.
All right, so where's the next step in the process?
Yeah, let's run up to the mezzanine and check out cooking and fermentation.
Final Third Cigar is Indiana's exclusive Aladino Cigar Lounge. Come to Final Third for a selection of over 20 different Aladino cigars, including the Cameroon, a wonderful cigar with nice light flavors. Make sure and visit Final Third, the Aladino exclusive cigar lounge for Indiana. All right, so we're up here and we see some fermentation going on. I always love it. The smells, It's like, I don't work at a distillery or a brewery, but tell us about this. Low and slow, right?
Yeah, low and slow. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have, this is essentially a 3,000 gallon system where we have a 3,000 gallon cooker. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3,000 gallon fermenters and a 3,600 gallon beer well. So, it will cook and that'll be a less than a day process. But once we pump into a fermenter and we add our yeast, which by the way, we use a single malt style of yeast that is bred for colder fermentations. And the reason for that is we ferment at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That's relative to other bourbon distilleries, that's a cold fermentation. The reason we ferment at a low temp is because we want a slow fermentation. So we're fermenting to 10% ABV rather than what you're probably typically going to see in the industry, which is 6% ABV. And that process is a 7-day process to 10% ABV at 78 degrees versus a, call it 3-day process, 3 to 4 day process to 6% ABV at 90 plus degrees fermentation.
So you're gaining a little bit out of this longer process at a 4% higher.
Correct.
And ethanol is what we're really trying to extract with all
Correct.
the flavor elements.
Correct.
So you are getting some,
Higher yield.
some
Yeah.
higher yield out of that
Yeah,
process.
we are. We get a little bit of benefit out of it. Obviously, the most important thing that we get out of it is our flavor profile.
Yep.
When it's short and hot, your yeast works itself into a frenzy producing alcohol and flavored CO2 a lot more quickly, right? And the harder that yeast works, faster it works, the faster it tires itself out, the more esterification you're getting from the yeast. Well, when you stretch that process out, you give that yeast time to ferment over a longer period of time, you don't get as much esterification from yeast. You get more esterification from grain and natural bacteria that sets in and creates almost a secondary fermentation process because it's such a long process with an open top fermenter. So what does that drive? It drives the flavor of our specialty malts instead of the flavor of yeast. And it drives complexity because of the secondary fermentation that happens from natural bacteria setting in over a longer period of time.
So we've had this discussion quite a bit recently about grain forward, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people would say, oh, this tastes grain forward, and they assume it's young, right? Or an
Yeah.
immature whiskey.
Right.
And we've really been kind of pushing the notion with various distillers that, we've been trying their products on the show
Yep.
and saying, hey, look, there is a vast difference between an immature whiskey and a mature whiskey that is really showing the grain. And to me, I really like that, lack of esterification, because you can get a lot of off-putting notes. If you're more of if you drink a certain amount of beer, right, enough, then you've probably had Belgian-style beers. And you can always tell a Belgian-style beer that has had too quick of a fermentation because it will get heavy on the banana notes and clove and some of the things that are all driven from yeast, not from grain.
Exactly.
So that's really interesting that you guys are able to create that grain forward product, and how you're doing it by limiting the off-putting esters from the yeast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we do want to be grain forward, and it's because of our recipes and the style of specialty malted grains that we're using that create that richness. But a lot of grain forward craft that perhaps isn't as desirable, it's possible and maybe likely that the additional steps in the process before it gets into the bottle are not paid as closely attention to.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say, we're distilling on, obviously the type of column you're distilling on, the proof you're distilling at, your barrel entry proof, your barrels, the barrel finishings, the toasts. Toasted barrels make a huge difference. They drive they drive 20 to 30+% different flavor profile from a toasted barrel versus an untoasted barrel. A Solera barrel process, the finishing process. We have a Solera barrel process. These are all aspects that drive flavor. So, there's a lot of potentially grain forward craft out there that isn't preferred because maybe it's a grain forward that is fermented at 95 degrees at 3 days. Maybe it's distilled at 150 proof and put into a barrel that's untoasted, and maybe the barrel aging climate isn't desirable. Maybe it's going in at too high of a proof. Maybe it's going in at 125 proof when it should be going in at 112 or 117 or something like that. So
grain forward isn't bad in our minds. We're looking at it and going, this is a representation of the farm that the grain came from, right? And trying to honor that element throughout the entire process.
I love that. I think it is shifting to where grain forward is a positive thing.
Yeah.
But I think in the beginning, because craft was new and there wasn't a lot of great craft stuff out there.
Yeah.
I think initially people heard grain forward or grainy, and they would associate grain forward and grainy,
and young,
but it's young.
Immature.
Yes, exactly.
All those things,
exactly.
Instead of the actual grain itself really presenting.
Yeah, I think we're changing that.
Yeah, and I love that. And look, we can all go out and get vanilla caramel and oak bombs, right? That's bourbon. That is really an essence of bourbon in the traditional sense, right? So, explain to us, we've been standing here and all of a sudden this thing just bubbles up. Are you guys doing a stir at the bottom of the tanks?
Chris, do your thing, man.
We are about to transfer this top half into our beer well.
Okay.
just to keep things moving along, because our volume in the beer well will get low enough that it starts to be dangerous for our agitator. And since all of this is the exact same recipe, we're good to just toss on top. So we're just keeping that continuous distillation going.
That's
Sweet.
awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thanks, Chris. Fellow Auburn grad there. Shout out.
Nice.
Shout out, War Eagle.
War Eagle.
All right. Well, this
So
is
if you guys were from the South, I couldn't say that, by the way. But I feel like this is a safe space. 'Cause
It
you're
is.
from
You're
the
good.
West, So, yeah.
You're not within a roll tie crowd.
Yeah, right.
here.
except for maybe my wife over there.
Yeah.
She'll start yelling "Roll Tide" at some
Okay,
point.
okay. All good.
Depends on how much Malibu she's
Yeah,
got.
right.
That's true. All right, we're
So
ready
let's,
for the
if you
next
guys,
step.
if you guys want to check out the
Smells
beer
good.
well.
Smells good.
Basically, like, okay, let's pump it straight out,
Yep.
right into here, right
Did he
into the
say he's
still.
drinking
Yep.
this or filling it?
Yeah, so this is our beer well. It's what we call distiller's beer.
Before they transfer.
Again, going back to that whole,
Distillery.
great whiskey comes from great beer.
We got our.
If we had a louder ton
Right.
and we could separate the solids and the, from the liquid, we could make beer right here. We could make a damn fine beer. So, but anyways, obviously all the solids go in to the column, and that's where obviously they're split there. So,
Now, low and slow. I gotta ask. You ever gonna get crazy enough to put like lager style bread yeast in here and take something down to 36 degrees and wait 6 weeks to then make a whiskey out of it? Or tell me you've already tried it.
that's a Grant question. I'm gonna let you ask Grant that question
Okay.
when you see him. So
Like
I'm
you
sure
said, you
I
buddy.
can.
Hey,
I
he
can
might
almost-
have something going on in his garage, right?
I can
Secret-
almost promise you that he's thought of it. The
that
one
would be a lot of work.
the one thing that he doesn't have any interest in doing is making beer anymore. So he really is just completely committed. He's personally passionate about what we make, and that's kind of what we consume is what we make. I mean, people ask me all the time, "What are you drinking when you're not drinking Chattanooga whiskey?" Well, in the first couple of years of distilling, when we didn't have a bourbon yet, you might have caught me drinking Four Roses single barrel or something like that. But now, after we've put over 100 different labels into the market, all under, all Chattanooga whiskey, variations of Chattanooga whiskey, I don't drink anything other than Chattanooga whiskey now. It's what we love. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Good testimony.
All right, I guess we're ready for the
Yeah.
still now.
Yep.
Thank you to sponsor Deadwood Live. Derek with Deadwood Live is producing top quality live edge products as well as bourbon themed furniture. If you've been in the lounge, you've seen the custom live edge table and barrel stools produced by Derek. Be sure to give him a like and follow on Facebook at Deadwood Live. That's DED Wood Live. Okay, so we're here in the distilling area. We see the column still, we see the doubler. Oh, we love seeing,
Condensers.
White Dog
Yeah.
flowing through here. Tell us what all we got. That goes way up there.
Yeah, so it's a 30-foot column, again, all produced by Vendome. This is actually a 14-inch in diameter column, but it looks a lot bigger than that, wider than that. It looks more like an 18 or even a 24 because of its insulation. So this is a fully insulated column, which makes it highly efficient throughout the different seasons.
And easy to stand next to without
Yep.
feeling like you're going to catch on fire.
Exactly. So our goal obviously is to be able to distill a 3,000 gallon fermenter in a shift. And Chattanooga Whiskey does not run night shifts. We run from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 5 days a week. So, culture is critically important to us, and we've been able to supply our demand without going into night shifts, and everybody seems happy with that. So anyways, we're going to run off our, obviously go into the column at 10% ABV, and we're going to come off our column at around 120 proof, 125 proof, and then we're going to go through our condensers. So our low wine at between 120 and 125 is going to be redistilled off of our doubler. And this is a custom doubler that Vendome made for us. And obviously the benefit of having the two different stills is on the column, you're distilling with all the solids in there. You're distilling on the grain, essentially, right? And that's gonna be condensed to where there's no more solids in there. And then it is transferred into the pot where you're distilling without the solids. So now it's just distillate and water that's in there. And what you're doing is you're cleaning that up, right? You're making that product significantly more approachable. Now, like I was saying in there, we're not cutting heads and tails on this column. I mean, it's 98% efficient. So that 2% of heads and tails, it just gets recycled back into the product for flavor and complexity over and over again. We are sour mashing. Just so people know, 91 and 111 is a sour mash bourbon by definition. Our tanks outside, we have a thin spent mash and a thick spent mash. Thick feeds cattle at Ramsey Farms, which I may or may not have had some of those cattle before. And then the thin goes back into every cook to kickstart the fermentation process.
Love a good sour mash.
Always. Yep.
So you said that one of your concerns was when you move the 91 recipe from the pot still to the column still, it's going to change.
Yeah.
But I heard you mention you thought it was even better.
Yeah.
Like, what was the biggest difference in the flavor profile when you went and took your 91 and just dropped it into the column?
Yeah. Well, so you guys will get to experience this at Experimental,
Okay.
especially when you try batch 39 Harvest Bourbon. But Experimental, that pot still, and it's not just probably that pot still, it's really, I mean, every different style of pot still in different climate, what, you know, how the product goes in, how the product comes out is going to be uniquely different from one another, right? So I don't want to just like brand all pot stills make the same flavor profile.
Right. Okay.
But our pot still flavor profile is it is uniquely its own. So when you try Harvest Bourbon versus anything that's been produced at Riverfront, you can kind of paint that picture of, oh, this is the style, when I say grunge, the style of complexity, deep, wide complexity that comes off of the pot still versus something that the average consumer would find much more approachable coming off of the column still. And that was really the main difference, is that what I found is you get a lot more like, let's say it's like super roasty coming off of the pot, and maybe that roasty is a little more toasty coming off of the column, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like you get a lot more honey drizzled toast. That's kind of like, well, everybody likes that. Maybe not everybody loves roasted,
Right.
but I think everybody likes honey drizzled toast, right?
Sure.
So that's really what the column does versus the pot. Now we work with drum roasted grains all the time, and so even what's coming, even with this column, you know, you can tell the difference between a drum roasted grain versus a lightly toasted grain. But that's the difference within this column, and you can tell the difference between those grains even with off the pot.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of my analogy between the two, you know, the two different type stills.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Well, we got these empty Glens here.
Yeah, I thought we would just stay here with empty Glens for the rest of the time. Is that cool?
man.
I love the nose on
I
this.
have one other
It's just-
question
I like
before
teasing everybody,
we
yeah.
fill the
All right, fire away.
one of the things that surprised me was you said you had scaled up like 30 different recipes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was just thinking that the Riverfront was your 91, your
Sure.
111.
Yeah.
And I know there are a few other recipes in the bottled and bond,
Yeah.
right? So you have like the weeded, because
Yeah.
I know that the Spring 2020 has some of the weeded ones.
Right.
30, like what other
Well,
products are you producing out of here?
I'm
or
glad
getting
you
ready
asked
to
that
produce?
question because I think the average consumer would think that.
Yeah.
But if you think about the fact that 91 and 111, you got non-GMO yellow corn, malted rye, caramel malted barley, and honey malted barley. In 99 rye, you've got caramel malted rye, you've got chocolate malted rye, pale malted rye, non-GMO yellow corn. In BIB, we do 2 vintages a year. We do a spring vintage and a fall vintage. Guess what? they're never the same.
Yeah.
And they're always rotating recipes, and they're never rotating the same recipes over and over again.
Right.
So from our first release until now,
Okay.
the amount of different grains that have gone into BIB is substantial, more than 10, I would imagine. Our barrel finishing series, our silver, our tawny port, that was the first one we ever did. Our Scottish style, our Scotch cask is what it was called. Our silver oak Cabernet Sauvignon, our white port. Now, most recently, our Pinot. All of those have an average of 5 to 6 grains. 5 to 6 recipes featuring 4+ grains. So there are dozens of recipes that go into our barrel finishing series.
Okay.
Founders, it has the 91 Solera, it's got the 1816 Solera, but the Infinity Solera has every recipe we've ever scaled up to Riverfront is going into the Infinity barrel. So there's more than 30 recipes in just the Infinity barrel alone that goes into the Founders recipe.
And the Infinity barrel is filled with material from the column still. It's not
Correct.
Like
Well,
I think
well,
I had the impression that some of that was coming from the experimental.
Some of it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an Infinity. It's like if
everything.
It's like if you have an Infinity decanter at home, it's the same thing. It's just a 1,700-gallon white oak barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was gonna wait till we got to the Solera cask room, but
Scott, if
And
you
maybe
ask one more damn question and I don't have whiskey in my glass, I'm going to start losing my shit, okay?
we'll talk about it in there. We'll talk about it in there.
All right.
Timing is everything, buddy.
So let's. Scott, you mind holding this?
No problem.
You're a fucking nerd.
Let's.
And no one likes you.
Don't fill me, filling my glass first. That's not cool.
Oh. Okay,
All right,
this
so
is
you
what
guys
we're
said
talking about.
earlier. By the way, this is Josh, everybody.
Good to meet you, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Third
Rob.
podcast.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
I'm Scott,
Scott.
and Mike out there,
Mike,
and then some wives.
wives.
Wives,
That's
You
why-
know, Lisa.
the anchors.
I would drink this, like I would buy this
Yeah.
in a
You
bottle.
can buy it, but it's proof to 100,
Oh,
and it's called silver. It's
Oh,
over at the
man.
experimental distillery.
Yeah, I was.
Scott, this was going to be our next experimental.
Oh, you're good, man. Thanks.
that would be a good call right there.
This is very
Yeah, I
tasty.
almost bought
Very
the
tasty.
silver, and I went, oh, they proved it down to 100.
Yeah.
Dang it.
We well, you know, like you guys were saying earlier, is you got to make a great white dog in order to make a great aged whiskey,
Yes.
Yeah.
and I think we make some of the best white dog anywhere. Every friend or industry member that I've walked through here, it's kind of the one thing that's repeated is, oh my God, this might be the white
don't
dog
know.
I've ever had.
Sorry, actually, I got a question. The proof off is still
132 and a half.
132 and a half.
32 and a half.
currently.
What'd you think?
Don't do that to her. She's also on camera and she doesn't want it.
It just ethanol you,
That's
right?
literally the best.
Well, the
The
one
best
thing
white dog I've ever
I
had.
get, maybe it's just me because it smells or anything, but this translates into the glass, especially the nose, but even on the flavor, what you smell when you're right around the fermenters.
Yeah, that's cool.
And a lot of times you don't get that. A lot
That's
of times
awesome.
you get more of the
Yeah.
flavor. But
I love that.
and when I walked in there, I'm like, man, it smells like baking
Yeah.
cake in
Yeah,
here.
yeah. I
And
mean,
that's good.
awesome.
I don't know why.
So one thing worth noting and capturing is that we work exclusively with ISC. You'll notice here on our barrels, it says Profile Toast 91 for each R. We custom toast many of our recipes, many of our barrels for our recipes, really trying to complement the recipe with the barrel the best way we know how. So we work exclusively with ISC in their R&D department on developing these toasts. 91 is perhaps one of the longest toasts that they offer. I believe it's north of a 40-minute toast. And so it's very confectionery, and it complements like the caramel malted barley and the honey malted barley, the caramel malted rye. And so what's fun about every step of the process, specifically 91, going above and beyond to find complexity, right? Well, when we distill a batch, the 3,000 gallon batch is going to yield about 8 barrels. So there's 4 barrels on a pallet, right? So we're going to bring 4 barrels down here. And those first 4 barrels are going to be Profile Toast 91 3-char. Those second 4 barrels are going to be a 4-char with no toast at all. And the reason we do that, so we can fully mature them to bourbon and then blend them together in the Solera barrel.
Yeah.
And that's where the Solera barrel becomes kind of like a cast iron skillet, where you're just layering that complexity of untoasted and toasted barrels over time. We do the same thing with 99 rye. It has its own toast profile. We do the same thing with some stout recipes that use a lot of heavy drum roasted grains, where they have their own toast profiles. We have multiple different custom toast profiles that vary depending on the recipe.
Okay.
I just got to say, this is like tangerine on the high notes when you're getting far away.
That's awesome.
I mean, I get really, really bright, citrusy, yeah, kind of like the oranges, the little oranges that you like,
Yeah.
the halos. Yeah, they're, I mean,
That's
this,
what's left on the tongue. It tastes like the orange. You're right.
Yeah.
But the nose. Well, we were talking about this a minute ago. The nose, and even the first sips, it just takes you right back to the fermentation. Same nose.
the
same
first sip
flavor. I was like,
absolutely
wow,
gets you
that's
right back
crazy.
into the grain.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Very, very good.
Awesome.
yeah, that, I think I agree with most of your peers that come through. This is some of the best white dog I have ever tasted. I've never immediately thought I want to buy a bottle of white dog. I
Yeah.
just wish you would have it at still proof.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of things I wish. So you guys were asking earlier about barrel entry proofs. I think, Scott, that was
Yeah.
your question. So we don't just do one barrel entry proof. Our barrel entry proof initially for a while was just 115 on the dot. But we realized that because alcohol is a solvent and you're working with different, toasted barrels and charred barrels, different seasonality, obviously, as to when they go away, when the first impact, that evaporation happens, is that it would be better if we would rotate different barrel entry proofs so that we blend those together as well. So we go in 113, 115, 117, and we split those equally based on the batch.
And is one barrel entry proof tied to a specific char level of the barrel, or is it just? It doesn't-
Nope, just
yeah.
So you're leaving a little bit of the magic to happen, just kind of
yep.
with some of the,
from batch to batch, we will bounce between 113, 115, and 117.
that's awesome.
It makes the entire finished product that much more complex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's another step in the process that you can create flavor.
Right.
So it's
You
about
just have
flavor
to
creation.
Find the magic things
Yeah.
to do to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. So
Well, this
now-
is awesome. Now you can ask your question, okay?
No, I have a question for
No, it's
once
a
we get
special-
you guys
to
wanna walk into the barrel house?
once we get to the Solera barrel. But I've had the opportunity to get a few of the 91 single barrels.
Yeah.
Like I go out and scavenge stores
Sure.
when I'm around. Are all of those the toast profile 91 char 3, or there are char 4 ones out there?
No,
'Cause
yeah, correct. They're not all. No, because it's a single barrel.
Right. So
They're
I'd be
not all.
curious.
You can get a 4-char with no toast. You can get one that is toasted. We do high wheat. We do high roasted.
Yep.
And we do
ones.
and we do Isla. Yeah, peated. Yeah.
I was just curious because what I wanted to do was get my hands on two 91s, one which was the toast profile 91 char 3 and one which was char 4, and just to taste the difference of the barrel, right?
Based on our experience with barrel selections between those two, the flavor, the palate that enjoys traditional bourbon over anything else. I mean, I say over anything else, that like exclusively drinks traditional bourbon goes for 4-char. The palate that explores a little bit more goes for toasted.
Yeah.
Toasted is heavy butterscotch. Like it's much more confectionery.
Yeah.
4-char with no toast, even though it's the same recipe.
This is your vanilla
It's,
caramel.
yes,
Vanilla, yeah.
caramel. Yes, vanilla caramel. There,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Bourbon.
Yeah, bourbon. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's
But
hit the,
without changing that, you lose the ability to create something special and new. And,
Right.
And
Yeah.
you're right. Too many people are trying to copy as opposed to make something new.
Yep.
See, I started as a Scotch drinker, so
I did too.
I love all this experimental stuff.
I was
So.
gonna say that kind of gives you guys, I think, an advantage going into bourbon. Whereas if you start a bourbon drinker, a lot of people, you don't,
They
don't
never
want-
get to Scotch.
They never
You're
exactly.
right.
They never get to it.
You're exactly right.
And they just lose out on all the variety, man.
Well, and the traditional, I wouldn't say the traditional. Thank you. I would say more now in
That
the
is the
bourbon
best way to
club,
really
bourbon
Yep.
hunter age. Proof is king.
Yeah.
So they keep going up in proof, and by the time you get up to where,
Yeah.
I mean, we're bad about that. I mean, we love high proof stuff, but we also appreciate the lower proof. But you get somebody that's drinking bourbon, 120 plus proof all the time, they're never going to appreciate an 80 proof.
Well, I mean,
Scotch.
again, you have to consider the fact that alcohol is a solvent. So
Yeah.
a lot of the time, you're going to lose a lot of those toasted elements. Or, I mean, why? It's almost like, why do a toast if you're just going to burn it up, right? So that's also a reason that I don't know, we're really particular about our proofs in all of our products. People would like to see some of our barrel finishings at higher proofs, but at 95 proof, you taste the barrel quite a bit more than you do at
Right.
110 or 115.
Right.
So,
Well, that's a good thing to touch upon too, because we've been talking about this a little bit with some other distillers. Just releasing a proof or a bottle at barrel proof does nothing unless that coming out of the barrel was delicious. You want to come out and find that magic mark where the proof and the flavors meet up and release it at that. And we found some really good ones lately. I mean, I don't know if you know Whiskey Acres out of Northern Illinois, smaller distillery, but they're doing that same kind of thing you guys are doing. They're trying to find the magic point. Don't just release the barrel proof. It'll sell usually, but is it going to create the returning customer?
yeah, we go through an extensive process to land on a proof. Even with
What, you guys all sit in a room and drink until you're...
yeah,
this one sounds.
Back it off by
tastes
two.
good now.
we sit in a room and responsibly drink for a long, extensive period of time.
That was where
yeah.
I was going with that, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have a distilling team of 15, and 5 of the distilling team members are heavy in the R&D process. So there's a lot of research and development that happens on a day-to-day basis. Grant, his background, obviously, Tiana Saul, our head distiller, her background as well. I mean, she was a phenomenal, mixologist before she became, a distiller.
Okay.
And she's just a kind of a maker of all things. She's an amazing, craft jewelry maker as well. And so, their level, Tiana and Grant's level of creativity, along with the rest of our team members. I mean, it's an extensive process that they have a lot of fun with, but we never just select a proof, blindly. There's a lot that goes into it, including the meaning around the number as well. We want to land on a number that means something.
Yeah.
So that's why the 91 ended up at 90. Like, what's the reason?
91 was the 91st barrel that we selected.
And the proof low.
Yep, and 91 proof. Well, 1816 Reserve was 90 proof.
Okay.
And when
So
we
it was-
selected barrel 91,
You're just
it
gonna-
was a holy shit moment for Grant and I. We were like, oh my god,
Right.
we gotta make this. We gotta
91
we
proof.
gotta make this 91 proof.
Yeah, absolutely.
To help tell the story. So
Well, before we all sweat to death out
Yeah.
here,
Yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
toasty in here.
Yeah. it is.
tell us about the
So we
the
have
barrels
approximately 5,000 barrels in here. We're pretty much at max capacity. We do have another barrel house across the street, and then we keep about 200 barrels at all times at experimental as well, which you guys will see later. And about 75% of our production capacity is the 91-111 recipe. The other 25% is made up of those 30 other recipes, which include 99 rye, bottled and bond, barrel finishing series, founders, single barrel. And we get heavy evaporation here. Heavy. I mean, southeast Tennessee, black brick building. It's like a dunnage, in middle Tennessee off the Tennessee River. It gets hot, it retains heat for a long period of time. So Grant and Tiana estimate that our evaporation is probably 25% greater than Central Kentucky in this location. So it's
Not quite Texas, but you're getting there.
yeah,
Yeah.
not quite, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's what I live by. I live by not quite Texas.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Now, with your aging here, are you focused? I mean, are you kind of trying to target a date range
That's a great question.
versus
So-
flavor, where you just go and start tasting stuff and see
No,
what's
it's all
ready?
been based on flavor. It's always been based on flavor.
Yep.
So our age ranges between just under 3 years and 7 years. It just depends on what the label is.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. We've all learned age is not indicative of great flavor. I mean, you can have some very high age stuff that it's really unimpressive, right?
Fun fact, first few years we were selling 91, so 2019, 2020, 2021, there were a lot of age questions. From 2022 through 2024, we almost never get it.
Yep.
Almost never. So it is changing.
Yes.
That is changing.
Yeah.
Well, and even like after the boom happened too, like, pre-prohibition, everything that was on the market or available at the time was 16 to 20-year-old product. Like,
Yeah.
nobody even thought about that.
Yeah.
But now it's so hard to get a 10-year
Yeah.
that, but like Scott said, like, we've tried some really good 2-year stuff that, kind of surprised us. So,
Well, and
but-
you got to think about the efficiency. 98%
Right.
efficiency
Yeah.
versus what they were doing 150 years ago.
Yeah.
Even what the purpose
barrel.
was, right? I mean, we've got all this corn. We got to find a
Yeah.
way to make money off
Yeah.
of it. Hey, let's ferment it and distill it, and then we can ship it places.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? I mean, we've had such a long progression through the history of whiskey in this country that is really, really interesting. But when we get to what we're doing today, you're going to have something that probably could be as good in a 5-year product as it used to be in a 20-year product.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Just because of all of the knowledge and experience
Yeah.
that we now have.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, one of the things that blew me away was my first bottle of Chattanooga was a 111. So I picked it up at Sobro or something like that. I'd never heard of it before. And I turned it over and it said greater than 2 years. And I'm like, okay, because some of the other younger whiskey that I've had was
Yeah.
not so great.
Yeah, your expectations are low. And
So
then
my
you-
expectation was
yeah.
low. And but then I tried it. I'm like, I've never had a 2-year-old whiskey or an age-stated 2-year-old whiskey, probably closer to 3, that tastes like this. And so I started giving it to people. I'm like, tell me how old this is. Tell me how old this is. And they're like 6 years, 7 years, or something like that. And so I wondered, what your take is. Is it the high malt content that makes it such that, a 2 or 3-year-old whiskey tastes like a 6 or 7-year-old whiskey?
I think it's a combination of a variety of specialty malts that drive flavor, and the long cold fermentation is a big part of it as well. I mean, I would also argue again that how we're distilling, the proof we're distilling at, barrel entry proof, toasted barrels, so these are all flavor drivers. So the more complexity, the more flavor you're getting out of that process, the more that it's less about leaning on one thing. And it has historically been about leaning on one thing. It's historically been about leaning on the barrel, and it's got to be in there a long time in order to drive that flavor.
Yep.
So, I'd say, but a long cold fermentation, I think, is big. And
No, I had fun with that. I was just like, I just give it to people and go, tell me how old you think
And
this
thus
is.
was born the super fan.
Right,
Yes.
right. Let's get out
Sorry.
of the hot box here.
Yeah, it is.
The doodles from the podcast.
oh, yeah.
There's a spaceship on the back.
Kilroy was here.
Okay, so we're here in front of 3 big barrels. I've been to a castle in Heidelberg where they've got the world's biggest wine cask,
Yeah.
and this looks a lot like that kind of stuff. So tell us what we're looking at here.
So this is our Solera barrel room. We have 91 and a 4,000 gallon white oak Solera barrel with a char on the inside of it. We have Infinity, which is a 1,700 gallon Solera barrel, also with a char on the inside of it. White oak as well, if I didn't mention that. And then 1816 is a white oak Solera barrel, 625 gallons, also with a char on the inside of it. So 3 giant char Solera barrels. The reason that we call them Solera barrels is because they are commingling product from the barrel house, these fully matured batches that have graduated to, straight rye or straight, bourbon or single malt, etc. And so in the case of 91, even though it's all that one recipe, 91's recipe, it's the blend of 4 chars, 3 chars with, the 91 toast profile. It's commingling these together. It's like a cast iron skillet where it's just this layering of complexities over time. Just like, your purist probably doesn't soap clean a cast iron skillet, we never empty this barrel. So the furthest we'll draw it down is 4 founders, which we might draw it down close to halfway, but we'll never empty it. We won't empty any of these barrels. So essentially, this room stands for our past, our present, and our future. So our 1816 recipe was our past. This is the only place in our operation that we actually keep and use this recipe. So it was the original NGP recipe, 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley. We have various ages of the MGP that are in there, between, I don't know, call it 3 and 6 years, I think. 3 and 6 years or 4 and 6 years. So that's our past. 91 is our present, because that's our present day flagship bourbon that replaced 1816 back in 2019. And from that point forward, 100% authentically produced here at Riverfront Distillery. And then the Infinity barrel is our future. We call it the future because it's our commitment to innovation. So we had all 3 of these barrels custom designed by Foeder Crafters out of St. Louis. And they were super excited to produce the Infinity barrel. They've never done anything like that before. And it's, designed like a double helix. And we have more than 30 recipes that are in there. It started off, so it was not available in Founders. By the way, we only blend these 1 time a year. So for our anniversary. So basically our birthday bourbon, which is Founders, right? We'll blend our past, our present, and our future together. But for our 10th anniversary, which was our first Founders release, it was only 91 and 1816. So it was only our past and our present. And then for our 11th anniversary, we introduced the Infinity, so the third. We introduced our future into it. And also for the 12th anniversary, which both the 11th and the 12th were very different percentages of these 3. In fact, the 12th anniversary, even though it was still led by 91, it was a heavier percentage of Infinity. So which started off with a lot of different single malts. It was mainly single grain, single malts that went in barrels, that went in single barrels that were single grains, that went into this barrel at first. Since then, we've put a lot of other stuff in there.
So you guys obviously been around for quite a while now.
Yeah, 13 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we think about kind of the bourbon boom.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been drinking bourbon the vast majority of my life.
Yeah.
Started getting into better stuff probably early 2000s. There wasn't new distilleries then. Like there was new breweries everywhere because we were still in the beer boom, but new distilleries weren't really a thing. So you guys, probably like High West, maybe a couple others, were some of the first to kind of do the MGP and have this stuff available. You know, High West being big into their finish, right?
Yeah.
All their port finish stuff is a big deal for them.
Yep.
Versus you guys that, you know, use this kind of as the foundation
Yeah.
for getting started and then moving into your own stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, this barrel right here probably represents, outside of MGP themselves, some of the oldest MGP whiskey in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, and I would say a lot of the guys that started off on MGP, there's really not that many that I know of that have fully transitioned away from it as well.
Correct. Yeah,
Which,
most of them are still,
yeah.
at the very least, blending,
Yeah.
if not still
Yeah, right.
solely utilizing.
Yeah.
Which we don't have a problem with that.
Right,
It's a unique, you know, marketplace for everybody. Some people are focused on finish. Some people
Yeah.
are focused on blending.
Yeah.
Right? And they're sourcing whiskey from all over the place.
No, I mean, they make a
blending,
great product.
They
I
do.
mean,
Yep.
yeah, and so,
But getting back to, you know, the core, if you're going to distill, do it well. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
product speaks for itself. You guys
I
are doing it
appreciate
very
that.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, just because high malt is our game now, and it has been since since we started distilling it in 2015, releasing it in August of 2017, and then releasing 91 in August of 2019. We just don't have a place really for this recipe, for this traditional recipe anymore, except for telling the story of our past in founders. You know, that gives us the opportunity to say, hey, this is where we came from. This is how we got here.
So I'm super curious, over 500 different experimental recipes and everything like that. Obviously, if you just start throwing everything in here, you might stuff that might not work,
Yeah.
right? How do you make the determination as to which recipes go in here, which recipes don't? How much of each recipe do we put in here? I've always been super curious about this.
I have no idea.
Somebody else makes that decision.
The reality is that in the beginning it was about single malts and having that single malt foundation to be able to blend.
Yeah.
And we have slowly but surely, started just adding more things that are not single malts, including experimentals that go in there. It is still a heavy malt forward, majority malt barrel. It probably will always be a majority malt barrel. But that's the beauty of an Infinity, right?
Yeah.
For this anyways. And keep in mind, we don't have a 100% Infinity product. Obviously this barrel,
Yeah.
but there's not a label that's 100%. It's a blending element, right? So this is 10 or 20 or 30% of, whatever percentage, less than a majority typically.
Right.
Maybe someday we might have a release that's a majority, but yeah, we just have fun with it. Now, when it comes to what goes into a bottle, it's interesting that I haven't come up with an equal parts between these three barrels that I have loved yet, because I feel like they've canceled each other out. The flavors have kind of canceled each other out. And by cancel each other out, I mean it almost is just kind of a muted, there's so much going on, it's like a muted whiskey. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very careful not to have equal blends of anything when I do that. So I do think that there's a point in time where you could probably throw so much into a product that, it falls a little flat. So we're kind of careful when we release products, like what those recipes are that we're blending together. That's very intentional. Like for our barrel finishing series, if there's 6 recipes that are blended together, or harvest bourbon, for example, 7 grains blended together, those are actually carefully selected to make sure that the grains are complementing each other. Whereas if you just if everything was just a dump bucket, yeah, a lot of those notes can cancel each other out. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got your biggest super fan here.
Oh, love it. It's an honor.
What's it take for somebody like him to get us?
Yeah, actually, so we can make a bottle of it, but I'm going to get our distillers to do that because we track proofs very closely here. If the TTB is listening, and so
they're big listeners of our show.
Yeah,
just
right.
so you know.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really regretted is in the last Founders, they had like a release event, And it was like, you can come down and you could try from each of these. And I was like,
Well,
what?
we did. So we do
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
What we do, obviously, we bottle those up,
Yeah,
and then we in the event hall
yeah,
we have those, so you can taste the products as they are out of the barrel before they make founders.
yeah. See, that's super
That would
cool.
be a fun project.
It is cool. It's a really well attended event, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah,
The first time we had a founders event, I think we had over 1,000 people here, and it was a little chaotic, and so we started limiting that to 250, and we made it a little bit more exclusive. We were not doing you can taste the 3 with the 1,000 people, but with the 250 we can control it.
Yeah.
So,
Super
anyways,
cool.
yeah, we
Yeah.
will. I'll get with Tiana and we'll make a bottle of this so we can try it.
Yeah, that
Awesome.
makes it awesome. That was
There's something surprising you did not expect to happen at this point in time. When you first started, you had a vision, but now here you are, anything that you just didn't expect to happen.
In general, with the organization,
Or
yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. There's a certain level of scale that I wasn't focused on. You know, I wasn't focused on like it has to be this scale. So being here with this distilling team, I mean, this is kind of beyond where my head was at originally. So there's that. Obviously, going through a co-founder breakup, that was unexpected, and that's just kind of one of those like business learnings that a lot of people go through, and it's just really challenging. Going through multiple capital rounds. I think the story of Tennessee High Malt that really came from Grant's inspiration and his background. Where that got us to today it's just been I say surprisingly successful, because I didn't really know what to expect. So I don't know. It's all kind of like a baby step process where I really don't know where it's going to go a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. We just try to focus on what we do well, and then hopefully that leads to a great opportunity to continue building the business. When we first started Chattanooga, it was a cool camp. People were excited about the Vote Whiskey campaign and getting behind us, and we had a lot of support, obviously, and that's why our mission is whiskey to the people, because it was the community that rallied around us to support us. But there were a lot of people that are like, well, it's made in Indiana, and it's like sometimes not cool to support the local thing. They would rather support the more established things that already have an established following, because they're cool that way. And I think the way that the community has now adopted us is the coolest thing for me. Is if somebody posts on Chattanooga Reddit page or something, and they're like, hey, what's a good bottle of whiskey nearby that I should buy? Like, the whole community is like, well, there's only one, and it's Chattanooga whiskey. There actually is a smaller distillery, Gate 11, across the street from us, but it is cool that the community now is so proud of what we've accomplished. It's taken 13 years to get there, So,
that's awesome.
yeah, I think it just, people forget that how long your Woodford Reserves and your Tito's and those brands, like I remember, I think the majority of vodka consumers thought that Tito's was like an overnight success. Been around for multiple decades, Same thing with Woodford, right?
Yeah.
So it just takes a really, really long time, and you kind of have to ride this economic wave. Right now, obviously, the bourbon boom is over, but American whiskey is still pretty dominant and within spirits, and I think it will continue to be because of the importance of its heritage, So we're in a great space.
Awesome. Well, where to next?
So the bottling line.
All right, so we're in the bottling line here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is honestly, anytime that we ever talk to distillers, this is kind of their least favorite.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
love to see the finished product.
Yeah.
But it always feels like the automation system, something's breaking, you got maintenance on all these things, it's tons of moving parts, and it's always funny to me to listen to, distillery owners talk about stupid bottling line.
Yeah, definitely a lot of opportunities for things to break in here, that's for sure. But, like Bailey and Andrew and our bottling team in here, I mean, they're the best at what they do. So we're pretty efficient. 100% of what we bottle here goes into our 16 states of distribution. So we bottle everything from Riverfront. We bottle everything from experimental, even though it's distilled and aged at experimental. We'll bottle it here as well. And yeah, so 6-head filling, automated filler, and we do, even though it's automated, we still do everything by hand. It's still small batch. It's still well cared for. So as you can see,
This has just been recently upgraded, hasn't it?
we built this line in 2019 when we launched 91 and 111.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So I noticed, one of the things I noticed is it looks like you moved from like a full cork top to like a wood with cork on the bottom.
Yeah,
So
beech wood.
what was the reason for that?
Yeah, from full cork from Portugal to beechwood cork with a hybrid cork shank.
Yeah.
So cork is near and dear to our hearts. It's how we started. We literally, 1816 Reserve and 1816 Cask started with a wine cork where you had to use a key to get it out.
Oh, wow.
A wine key to get it out. So, so we always wanted to use natural cork for that reason, but we struggled with cork tape. And ultimately, even if it's 0.05% of cork tape for us, it's not worth the risk. So we still customized our beechwood cork. So it's it's the size of it, exactly the same dimensions as our last one, and obviously real wood and feels substantial. In fact, some of the feedback we've gotten, most people actually like this cork better than the real cork.
Yeah, I do.
So it feels heavier and just more substantial, which it drives that quality message. But we're not dealing with cork taint. And again,
Now I'm worried about a bunch of bottles I have in the house.
well, like I said, very, very small percentage. But when consumers experience cork taint, they don't know it's cork taint. They just think it's a bad bottle of whiskey.
Yeah.
And for what we put into our product,
To have it ruined by something.
to have it ruined by something else like that,
Not worth a chance.
again, love natural cork. If you're into 98, 99% of it being great and 1 or 2% of it possibly not, which we were for a really long time, by all means, it's the coolest product out there. So still want to be a supporter of it, but we needed to go this direction because for us, even the smallest percentage was not worth it to us.
Well, thank you from a bartender's perspective, making it easier to get off.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the bartenders when you had to use a corkscrew to get it out, they hated us. They hated our
Oh,
product.
I don't doubt it.
So,
Now, are you boxing everything by hand here?
yep. Yeah, it runs through this. It just tapes through this taper, and then we put 108 cases to a pallet and ship it out. So, yep, 91, 111, 99 rye, barrel finishing series, bottled and bond, single barrel, founders, they all come through this bottling line.
Awesome.
They all come from Bailey's hands.
It's good to know the guy who's touched every single bottle of whiskey we drink. All
You guys
right.
ready to roll into the middle?
Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lead the way.
All right, awesome.